My husband faked his own death. I found him remarried and happy in another city. The day Nkechi buried her husband, the whole village of Umweze wept with her. The women tore their wrappers and wailed into the harmattan wind. The men beat their chests and poured libations on dry earth. The children cried because their mothers cried, not fully understanding what death meant, only sensing that the world had cracked open and something warm had fallen through. Nkechi did not wail. She stood at the edge of that shallow grave, her 7-month-old son strapped to her back with a faded Ankara cloth, and she stared at the wooden box being lowered into the ground with eyes that had gone completely still. The kind of still that comes not from peace, but from grief so enormous it had consumed all other feeling. She was 26 years old. She had been married for 3 years, and now she was a widow. If you are new here, stay with me. This story is going to shake something inside you, and if it does, that subscribe button is right there because we tell stories like this every single week. His name was Tobenna Okafor. Toby, she called him. Toby with the gap-toothed smile and the laugh that came from somewhere deep in his belly. Toby who used to bring her garden eggs from the market just because she mentioned once, that she liked the way they tasted with palm oil and crayfish. Toby who held her hand during labor and told her she was the strongest woman God had ever made. That Toby. That was the man they said had drowned in the Oji River on a Tuesday morning in the dry season of 2009. The story, as it was told to Nkechi, was simple enough. Toby had gone fishing with 2 other men from the village, Chukudera and an older man everyone called Baba Eze. The current had been deceptive that morning, stronger beneath the surface than it looked from the bank. Toby apparently had leaned too far, a slip, a scream, and then nothing. They recovered Chukudera downstream 3 hours later, shaken but alive. Baba Eze had never gone in at all. He said he saw Toby fall and ran to the village for help. By the time anyone returned, the river had swallowed whatever remained. They never found a body. The village elders explained this away. The Oji River was known for keeping what it took. It was old, it had its own hunger. They performed the necessary rites, buried an empty coffin filled with Toby's clothing and a photograph, and declared the matter closed. Nkechi was given 40 days of mourning, after which her in-laws began the quiet, suffocating work of reclaiming everything. They took the small plot of land Toby had been farming. They said it belonged to the family. They took the motorcycle he had been paying off in installments, claiming they needed to settle the remaining debt, though Nkechi never saw any receipt. They tried, with smiling faces and gentle voices that barely concealed the iron underneath, to take her son. They suggested she was too young, too grief-stricken, and too without resources to raise a boy properly in their compound. They said they would help, that it was customary, that it was for the child's good. Nkechi packed what she could carry into one bag, strapped her son Chisomaga to her back, and walked out of that compound in the early morning before anyone was awake. She walked to her mother's house in Oka. 4 hours on foot and 2 hours on a bus, with a baby on her back and nothing but her own fury keeping her upright. Her mother, a small, fierce woman named Ngozi, who sold second-hand clothes in the Eke Oka market, opened the door, took one look at her daughter's face and said nothing. She simply stepped aside, let Nkechi in, took the baby and put water on boil. This is the woman this story is about. Remember that, because everything that comes next only makes sense when you understand who Nkechi was before the world tried to break her. She rebuilt slowly. Her mother helped watch Chisomaga while Nkechi went back to school to finish the secretarial course she had abandoned when she got married. Then she found work, small, underpaid, exhausting work, first as a typist in a government office that smelled of old paper and political defeat, then as a records clerk in a private firm in Oka. She was meticulous, fast, and she never complained. By the time Chisomaga was 3 years old, Nkechi had saved enough to rent 1 room in a share house. By the time he was 5, she had 2 rooms. By the time he was 7, she was working as an administrative officer and had started taking evening classes in accounting. She did not think about Toby every day. She had trained herself out of it the way you train yourself out of touching a wound, not because the wound is gone, but because touching it does nothing except remind you it is there. She kept 1 photograph of him on the shelf above her bed, facing slightly away from her so she did not have to see his eyes first thing every morning. She told Chisomaga that his father had been a good man taken by the river. She said it simply and factually, the way you tell a child about rain. She did not date. Men tried. Some were kind, some were not. None of them understood the particular geometry of her life, the precise angles of grief and survival, and a child's needs that left no room for anything complicated. She thanked them, declined, and went back to her books. This is what her life looked like in 2017, 8 years after the burial. Chisomaga was 8, gap-toothed like his father, so like his father that sometimes Nkechi had to leave the room when he smiled. She was 34, competent, quietly respected at her office with a small but reliable life that she had built herself, stone by stone, from nothing. And then her colleague Blessing came back from a trip to Enugu with a story. Blessing was the kind of woman who collected stories like other people collected shoes, enthusiastically, indiscriminately, and always with the conviction that every single one was the most remarkable thing she had ever encountered. So when she sat down across from Nkechi at lunch and said, "I saw a strange thing in Enugu, I need to tell you," Nkechi half listened. She was eating jollof rice and going through a reconciliation report simultaneously. But then Blessing described the man she had seen in Enugu. He was at a naming ceremony for a friend of a friend, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a gap in his front teeth and a laugh that came from his belly. He was there with his wife, a pretty woman everyone called Adana, and their 2 children. His name, Blessing said, was Tobenna, not a common name, not a common laugh, a common gap in the teeth. He looked exactly like someone I've seen before, Blessing said, frowning slightly, but I can't place where. Do you know anyone in Enugu named Tobenna Okafor? Nkechi's fork stopped moving. The reconciliation report slid off the table. She did not pick it up. What did you say his name was? Blessing repeated it. The world did not spin. Nkechi had always imagined, in the abstract, theoretical way you imagine impossible things, that if she ever heard something like this, the world would spin, that she would faint or scream or crumble. Instead, everything became very, very quiet. The cafeteria noise receded. Blessing's face seemed to come very close and then very far away. "Describe him again," Nkechi said. Her voice was perfectly level. So Blessing described him again. The height, the shoulders, the gap, the laugh, the way he held his youngest child, a girl, balancing her on his hip with the casual ease of a man comfortable with fatherhood. He had been wearing a blue agbada. He had been telling a joke when Blessing walked in. He looked about 37, 38. He had a small scar on his left chin. The scar. Nkechi knew that scar. She had kissed that scar 1,000 times. Toby had gotten it falling off a bicycle when he was 12. He told her the story on their second date, laughing at himself, touching the raised skin self-consciously. She had reached across the table and touched it first, and he had gone very still, looking at her with an expression she had not recognized then but understood now as the precise moment he had decided he was going to marry her. "Where exactly in Enugu?" she asked. Blessing blinked. "Nkechi, are you okay? You've gone very pale." "I'm fine. Where in Enugu?" Now, here is where you might expect Nkechi to do something dramatic. To call the police perhaps, or to collapse, or to immediately go to Enugu guns blazing. But Nkechi was not that kind of woman. She was the kind of woman who had walked 4 hours with a baby on her back. She was the kind of woman who had rebuilt a life from 1 bag of clothes. She did not act before she was certain, and she was not yet certain. She was close though. She was very, very close. She told no one, not her mother, not Blessing, beyond asking for the address of the compound where the ceremony had taken place, not a soul. She filed the information away with the same careful precision she used for financial records, checked, double-checked, stored safely, and she waited. She waited 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, she did 3 things. First, she dug out the death file she had kept in a tin box under her bed, the right documents, the statements from Chukwudera and Babaize, the letters from the in-laws, everything she had accumulated in those first terrible months after Toby disappeared. She read every word of it. Second, she made a quiet trip to the village of Umueze, presenting it to her mother as a desire to check on Toby's grave. She did not go to the grave. She went to Babaize's house. Babaize was old now and sick. He was lying on a mat in his room, a thin blanket over him despite the heat, being attended to by a teenage granddaughter. When Nkechi walked in, his eyes opened, and something moved across his face that she would have missed if she had not been watching for it. Something that looked like fear. She sat down. She was polite. She asked after his health. She made the small talk of a respectful young woman visiting an elder. And then, very gently, she said, "Babaize, tell me again what happened that morning by the river." He told her the same story, the current, the slip, the scream. "And you did not go into the water yourself," she said. "I am an old man, I cannot swim." "You told the elders you ran to the village for help," she said. "Yes," he said. "Which direction did you run?" He paused, just slightly, just a fraction of a pause that most people would not notice. "The main path," he said. Nkechi nodded. She made a small note in her mind. The main path from the Oji River fishing spot ran north through a stand of trees and past the old palm wine tappers clearing. She had walked it once, years ago, with Toby. She knew that on that path, if you were running from the river, the Eze family compound was visible through the trees about halfway up. It was not a long run. A healthy young man in a panic could have done it in 6 or 7 minutes. Chukwudera, who had been recovered downstream 3 hours later, had been found by people from a neighboring village, not from Umueze. Nobody from Umueze had gone downstream that morning. The help Babaize had run to fetch had apparently gone in the entirely wrong direction. She thanked him, stood, and left. Third thing, she found a woman named Chisom who ran a small trading business between Oka and Enugu, and she paid her to make inquiries. Not obviously, not in a way that would alert anyone, just a friendly woman asking neighborly questions at a naming ceremony compound, a trader visiting Enugu for business. What Chisom brought back confirmed everything. There was indeed a man named Tobenna Okafor living in the MNA area of Enugu. He had arrived in Enugu approximately 8 years ago in 2009. He had told people he was from Onitsha. He worked as a building contractor, had done reasonably well for himself, and married a woman named Adaize, not Adana, Blessing had misheard, in 2011. They had 2 children, a boy of 5 and a girl of 3. Tobenna Okafor was known in his neighborhood as a cheerful, generous man, a good husband, a good father. Everyone liked him. The night Chisom delivered this information, Nkechi sat in her room after putting Chisomago to bed, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not rage, though the rage was there, deep and slow burning like a coal that never fully cools. Not grief, though that was there too, an older grief, the grief she had thought was done with. What she felt more than anything was a profound and almost scientific curiosity. She wanted to understand. She needed to understand how a man does this. How a man holds his wife's face in his hands and tells her she is the strongest woman God ever made, and then walks into a river and lets her think he is dead. She needed to look him in the eyes when she asked that question. She planned the trip to Enugu for 3 weeks. This is the part that people who learn this story later always find remarkable. The planning. The way she prepared as though she were preparing a presentation for work. She had the address. She had a loose understanding of his daily routine from Chisom's enquiries. She knew which days he went to the main market for supplies. She booked a one-way bus ticket for a Saturday morning and arranged for Chisomago to stay with her mother for the weekend, telling her mother only that she had to attend to something personal. Her mother looked at her with the particular focused attention of a woman who has raised a daughter through catastrophe and knows when that daughter is walking to fire. Nkechi, her mother said, "Whatever you are going to do, be careful." "I'm always careful, Mama."
That is not what I said. The bus to Enugu left at 6 in the morning and arrived by 9. Nkechi wore a simple blouse and wrapper, nothing that drew attention. She had a small bag with one change of clothes and her phone. She had written nothing down. Everything was in her head, where no one could find it. Subscribe. Seriously, if you are still here, you already know this is not a regular story. Don't miss what comes next, because the moment she actually sees him for the first time, that scene will stay with you. She found the construction site first. It was in the GRA area of Enugu, a half-built residential building behind a chain-link fence. She stood across the road in the partial shade of a kiosk selling soft drinks, a bottle of Fanta in her hand, and she waited. He came out of the site at 20 minutes past 11. He was wearing work clothes, dusty trousers, a singlet, a yellow hard hat that he removed as he stepped through the gate. He was talking to someone behind him, gesturing with one hand, still mid-sentence, and then he turned forward and Nkechi saw his face. 8 years. He was 37 now. There was more weight on him, more fullness in his face. His hair was cut low. He had let a beard grow, something he had never done when they were married. But the walk was the same. The way he placed his feet slightly turned outward with a rolling ease that she had always teased him about, calling it his village chief walk. The gap in his teeth flashed white when he laughed at whatever the person behind him had said. The gap in his teeth. Nkechi took one long sip of Fanta. She put the bottle down on the counter. She crossed the road. He didn't see her at first. He was still half-turned, still finishing his conversation. She walked to within 5 feet of him and stopped. She waited. And then the person he was talking to said something that made him look forward, and he saw her. The change in his face was immediate and complete. The color did not drain. This is not something you can easily see in an Igbo man, but the blood retreats from certain places and the skin loses a quality, a kind of surface warmth, and what is left looks subtly like stone. His mouth stopped moving mid-word. His eyes, always so expressive, went absolutely flat. For 2 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then Nkechi said in a voice so calm it frightened even her, "Hello, Tobenna." She watched him decide in real time what to do. She had always been good at reading his face, had been once the person who knew his face better than anyone on earth. She could see the calculation, the denial, the assessment of his surroundings, the measuring of distance between them and the gate, between them and the road, and then underneath all of that mechanical panicking, something else, something that looked almost like relief. That undid her more than anything else could have. He did not run. He did not deny. He said her name, Nkechi. Just that, her name in his voice, which had not changed at all in 8 years. She said, "We need to talk." He took her to a small drinking spot 2 streets away. He sat across from her on a wobbly plastic table and ordered 2 bottles of water he did not touch. He did not look at her directly. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at a point somewhere slightly to the left of her shoulder, the way people look when they are trying to locate courage they have misplaced. She waited. He started to speak twice. Twice he stopped himself. On the 3rd attempt, he said, "I didn't think you would ever find me." "That," Nkechi said, "is the most honest thing you have said since I arrived." Here is what he told her, piece by piece, with the shamed reluctance of a man dragging something large and buried out of the ground. He had been in debt. Not a small debt, the ordinary kind that embarrasses you and makes you avoid certain people. A devastating debt, the kind with consequences. He had borrowed money from a man in Onitsha, a man everyone in that circuit knew by reputation as someone you paid back on time, every time, without exception. The money had been for a business venture, a supply contract that had collapsed before it began through no entirely simple set of circumstances that Toby described carefully and at length, and Nkechi listened without expression. The debt had grown. The interest had compounded. The man in Onitsha had sent people, not once, 3 times. The third time, one of those people had followed Toby home at night and waited outside his compound for an hour before leaving. Toby had watched from the window. He had not slept that night or the night after. He had panicked. He said this with what seemed like genuine shame. He had panicked in the specific, catastrophic way that some men panic, which is not screaming or asking for help, but going very still and quiet and making a decision in isolation that destroys multiple lives simultaneously. He had recruited Baba Eze, an old family friend who owed Toby's late father a favor going back decades, and he had recruited Chukudera, who had been played. He did not say how much. The plan was for him to disappear. Just disappear. The river story gave it a reason. A body that the river kept would explain everything. He would be dead on paper, invisible in practice. The debt would die with him. The man in Onitsha could not pursue a ghost. Nkechi listened to all of this. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And me, where did I fit into the plan?" He looked at his hands. "You would be young," he said quietly. "You would grieve, but you would be young. You would eventually—" "Don't," Nkechi said. He stopped. "Don't finish that sentence," she said. She leant forward. She had done something remarkable in preparing for this conversation. She had decided what she would and would not allow herself to feel in his presence, and she was holding to that decision with both hands. She would not cry, she would not rage. She would collect information like a clerk processes documents, systematically, without personal interference.
Chisomaga, she said, your son, did he also factor into the plan? The look on his face then. There are expressions that don't have words. This was one of them. He was in the womb, Toby said. He was 7 months in the womb, she said. He is now 8 years old. He has your smile. He has your walk. He asks me sometimes why God took his father and not someone else's father. I have told him every year that his father was a good man taken by the river. She paused. That was a lie. I was telling my son a lie every year because of what you did. The silence that followed was long. A woman at another table laughed at something on her phone. Outside, a motorcycle honked twice. "What do you want?" Toby said. His voice was very low. This was the question. This was the question everyone who hears this story eventually asks. What did Nkechi want from that conversation? Revenge? Money? An apology she could display like a trophy? Some fantasy of reconciliation that we all know was impossible? Here is what she told him she wanted. She wanted him to come with her to Enugu State's civil registry and sign a formal declaration, not a public one, a legal one, acknowledging that he was alive. She needed that document for Chisomaga. Her son, legally and on paper, was the child of a dead man. There were benefits, inheritance questions, school records, a whole bureaucratic ghost story that she had been navigating for 8 years. She needed Tobenna Okafor legally alive to make certain things right for his son. She wanted money, not for herself. She made very clear with great emphasis that she did not want a single kobo for herself, for Chisomaga, a monthly amount agreed upon, paid through an arrangement she would specify. The amount was reasonable. It was the amount of a man of his apparent income could manage.
And she wanted him to tell Chisomaga when Chisomaga was old enough to understand, which she had decided would be 18, the truth. Not what to say, not how to say it, just that the truth would be said and not by her. He created this story. He would finish it. That was what she wanted. She did not want him. She did not want his marriage destroyed. She did not want his new wife, Adaeze, who had not chosen any of this and was raising 2 children in a house built on a foundation she didn't know was rotting. She did not want that woman's life blown open. She had thought about Adaeze on the bus ride here. She had thought about her quite a lot. Adaeze, she had decided, was as much a victim of Tobenna Okafor as she was. Toby sat very still while she laid all of this out. When she finished, she looked at him for the first time directly, and she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Not gratitude, too clean a word, something more complicated, something like the expression of a man who has been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for the bill to come due, and feels a terrible, strange relief now that it has arrived. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She made him write his phone number on a piece of paper, though she would never call it for reasons other than business. They agreed that his wife would not be contacted by Nkechi, not because Toby asked this, but because Nkechi had decided it. She stood up, gathered her bag, and prepared to leave. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. There was one more thing. "Ebuneze is dying," she said. "He has been carrying this for 8 years. Whatever happens to you, whatever arrangement we make, you find a way to go and see him before he goes. You let him know that the thing he helped you carry is being set down. You do that much." Toby said nothing. "Do you understand me?" she said. "Yes," he said. She walked out. On the bus back to Akwa, she sat by the window and watched Enugu recede, and she allowed herself finally to feel something, not the rage or the grief she expected, something quieter, something like the sensation of a splinter being walked out of skin, brief, sharp, and then a lessening of its pressure so long-standing you had forgotten it was there. She did not cry. She thought about the day of the funeral, the empty coffin, the wooden box with his clothes and his photograph, the village women wailing in the harmattan wind. She thought about how she had stood at the edge of that grave and felt the world crack open. She thought about the walk to her mother's house, 4 hours, with Chisomaga pressed against her back. She thought about the single room and the 2 rooms and the evening accounting classes and the years and years of making something from nothing. She thought, "I did not need him to survive. I only needed to know the truth to be free." By the time the bus reached Akwa, she had decided she was free. Now, this is the part most people get wrong when they hear this story. They expect what came next to be some dramatic collapse, Toby refusing, the whole arrangement breaking apart, Nkechi going to his wife, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. They expect the worst because that is what people do when they are hurt. Toby did not collapse. 2 weeks after their meeting in Enugu, he appeared at the civil registry in Akwa. She had arranged it through a lawyer cousin of her mother's, a young woman called Obiora. No, wait, the lawyer was female. Her name was Ngoji Kuka. Everyone called her Ngo, who handled the paperwork with a professional detachment that Nkechi deeply appreciated. Toby signed everything. He sat across from Ngo in a small office, and he answered every question, and he signed every form, and his hand did not shake. He set up the account for Chisomaga before the end of the month. The money came on the 3rd of every month thereafter, regular as breathing, for every month of the years that followed. And in November of 2009, about a month after all the papers were signed, Nkechi received a text message from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "I went to Umweze. I sat with Baba Eze. He was glad. He passed 3 days later. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she deleted it and went back to Chisomaga's homework, which he was doing at the kitchen table, scowling at a mathematics problem with a look of supreme concentration that was so like his father's that Nkechi had to press her lips together and breathe slowly through her nose. "Mama," Chisomaga said, not looking up, "what is 6 times 8? 48, she said. "Are you sure?" "Chisomaga, I am an accountant." He made a face, wrote the answer, and went back to frowning. She sat next to him and opened her own book. And the evening continued in the ordinary, unremarkable way that evenings continue when the extraordinary work has been done and life, astonishingly, goes on. Here is something that this story is not about. It is not about forgiveness. People always want it to be about forgiveness. They want Nkechi to announce at some clean and dramatic moment that she has forgiven Toby and released him and found peace in letting go. Forgiveness stories are satisfying. They have a shape that people recognize. They end with someone lighter than they began. This story is not that story. What Nkechi achieved was not forgiveness. It was something colder and more durable. It was accounting. She identified what was owed, she collected what could be collected, she documented the rest. She filed it, not in a box under her bed, but in the part of her mind that resolved matters go to gather dust. Toby would always be something that happened to her. He would not always be something that was happening to her. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. Chisomaga grew up. He did his primary school, his secondary school, with a quiet seriousness that reminded Nkechi of herself and a periodic eruptive cheerfulness that reminded her of someone else. He was good at mathematics as it turned out, better than Nkechi had been. He sat for JAMB and got 312. He was admitted to study engineering at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. The day his admission letter came, Nkechi sat at her kitchen table and cried for the first time since the bus ride back from Enugu years ago. Not from sadness, from the sheer accumulated weight of all the years it had taken to get here. All the mornings she had gotten up and put one foot in front of the other and made lunch and gone to work and come home and made dinner and helped with homework and done it again. She was 42 years old when Chisomaga went to university. She had been promoted twice at her firm and was now the senior financial officer. She had bought her own flat, small but hers, fully hers, with a balcony that caught the afternoon light beautifully. She had a small garden she maintained with the same systematic dedication she applied to everything. She had one very good friend, Blessing, who unknowingly changed everything by describing a laugh and a gap in the teeth, and who still told stories at lunch with the infectious conviction that each one was the most remarkable thing in the world. She did not have a partner. She had considered it twice seriously. Both times she ultimately stepped back. Not from fear, she told herself, and perhaps that was even true, but from the recognition that her life had found a shape she found genuinely satisfying, and she was not certain she wanted it reshaped by someone else's needs and habits and biography. When Chisomaga was 18, she told him, not everything, not the debt, not the river, not the years of secrets and the trip to Enugu. She told him the central fact. His father had not died. His father was alive and living in Enugu. His father had been paying from a distance for certain things in his life. The rest of it, the why and the how and the complete story, would be told by his father directly. She had Toby's number. Chisomaga could use it or not. That was entirely his own decision. She had expected the conversation to be harder. She had prepared herself for his anger, at her for holding back, as much as at the man she had thought was a grave. But Chisomaga was 18 and already more himself than she had fully recognized. He listened. He asked 2 questions. The first was, "Did you know the whole time?" She told him the truth. She had not known until he was 8. The second was, after a long silence, is he a good person? She thought about this question seriously before answering. She finally said, he is a person who did a terrible thing and who, when faced with the consequences, did not run away a second time. She paused. I don't know if that makes him good. It makes him something. Chisamaga nodded. He looked at the number on the piece of paper she had given him. He folded it and put it in his pocket. He did not call it that day or the next. A month later, quietly and without telling her after, he called. She did not ask what they said. It was not her conversation to know. What she knew was that when Chisomaga came home for his first university holiday, he was quieter than usual and more settled, as though something that had been displaced inside him had found its way back to the right place. He sat with her on the balcony in the evening, and they watched the Awuka sky go from orange to purple to the particular deep blue that precedes real dark, and he said, Mama, how did you manage all those years? She thought about the question. She thought about the 4-hour walk and the single room and the evenings over accounting textbooks and the photograph on the shelf turned slightly away. She said, 1 day at a time, and sometimes 1 hour at a time, and sometimes 1 minute at a time. He was quiet. It doesn't sound like very much until you count up all the minutes. He took her hand. Her son, who had his father's smile and his father's walk, and her own particular stubbornness baked into every bone. Her son held her hand on the balcony as the sky went fully dark, and neither of us said anything else. And that was exactly right.
This is where the story of Tobenna Okafor's great cowardice and Nkechi Okafor's greater courage ends. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with justice administered by fire, not with ruin or triumph in any form that makes for easy storytelling. It ends on a balcony in Awka, with a mother and her son watching the sky, and the quiet acknowledgement unspoken between them that they had come through something enormous and were still standing. There is a thing the Igbo say, Oye wetara oji, wetara ndu. The one who brings kola brings life. It is about welcome, about what we offer to others when we choose to meet rather than to flee. Toby fled, and whatever partial redemption he found in the aftermath, the signed papers, the monthly accounts, the visit to a dying old man, was not the same as the life he had chosen not to bring. But Nkechi brought life every single day for 17 years, for a child who needed it, for herself, for the small but complete world she built with her own capable hands. She brought kola, she brought undu, she brought life in the only way that matters, not with speeches or gestures or grand dramatic moments, but with the daily, unglamorous, relentless choice to keep going. In the village of Umwezi, the old women still pour libations at the Oji River during the dry season. They remember Tobenna Okafor's funeral with a particular melancholy reserved for young men taken too soon. Nobody has told them differently. And perhaps that too is a kind of mercy. Not for Toby, who does not deserve it, but for them, who deserve to keep the stories that give their rituals meaning. The river keeps what it takes, they see. Sometimes, though, what looks taken has only gone somewhere else, and what the river keeps is just the space where something used to be, holding its shape in the water for years, patient and cold and waiting for someone to look closely enough to notice that the emptiness has a form. Nkechi noticed, and having noticed, she did not collapse into the void. She reached into it, took back what was hers, and walked away. That is the whole story. That is all of it. If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle, If you found yourself thinking about the women you know who have walked their own 4-hour walks with something heavy on their backs, then you know why we do this. We tell these stories because they are true. Not necessarily in the newspaper sense, but in the deeper sense that matters. They are true in the way that the things that happen to real people are true. Complicated, painful, unresolved in some places, and over-resolved in others, never quite fitting the shape we expect from a story. Subscribe, hit the bell, come back next week, because there are more stories where this one came from, and some of them are going to stay with you in ways you won't expect. The one coming next week, I will just say this. It involves a woman who received her own funeral invitation. That's all I'm saying. We'll see you there.